Welcome back to the channel, everybody. We are still working on the 135i. We haven't gotten to that full bolt-on stage yet, but we're getting there. One of the things that we really want to address is, obviously, we talked about the maintenance. One of the major maintenance things that we want to do before we go full bolt-on are the brake calipers. We want to make sure that we have fresh pads, fresh rotors, and that's really what we're focusing on today. We're going to work on replacing all four corners of the brake rotors and brake pads, because more power means that we need that stopping power to be up to date. And we're going to replace it with the OEM. As you know, this is a daily driver, a full bolt-on daily driver. It's going to be really fun, but we want to make sure that it stops as well as it goes. So stay with us for the journey, and we're going to show you how to kind of do a brake job on the 135i. 6-piston caliper up front, 2-piston in the back, Brembo calipers. It's quite the braking setup that you have here. So it's good to kind of refresh it, making sure everything is really, there's a lot of meat on the rotors and also on the pads, and making sure there's no kind of vibration from any warpage, right? So we'll inspect everything. We'll show you, some of the good and bad of doing a brake job, but making sure that we do this kind of thorough process. We want to make sure that, it's safe, right? I'm using this car almost every day, but at the same time, I want it to be faster with the full bolt-on mods, the downpipe intercooler coming next. So let's work on the brakes today, and we will make sure to kind of inspect everything underneath of the wheels and update it with the Techstar brake pads and also the Zimmermann brake rotors, which are the OE kind of supplier without paying that genuine BMW tax.
Hey everyone, Daniel here. For this episode, we're going to try something new and have me talk over the video, as most of this footage will be sped up so that we don't show you 3 hours worth of a brake job. We have a ton of information to share that'll come in handy if you ever decide to do this on your own one day. So we'll be changing the brake pads and the rotors for both the front and the rear of the 135i. You don't have to swap both the rotors and the pads at the same time unless they're both due for a change. And you'll see in this video that the front rotors aren't in too bad of a shape that warrants a replacement. But Aiden is sort of a freak of nature and OCD, so he's decided to do everything at once. By the way guys, all of the brake parts we're going to use in this episode are ordered from a vendor called fcpeuro. They're an amazing vendor, and majority of the parts that we'll be using for the rest of this bolt-on project will also be ordered through them. And here's Aiden on why fcpeuro is his go-to vendor for parts.
And I love ordering things from fcpeuro. FCP has a lifetime guarantee, warranty on everything. That includes things like wear and tear items like brake rotors, brake pads, everything that they sell is lifetime warranty, which I don't think any other vendor has that. So if you are ordering parts for your BMW, your Porsche, VW, Volvo, any European car that you might own, check out fcpeuro. It's my favorite vendor just because of that sole reason, and their, free shipping is super duper fast.
Alright, so the rotors are from Zimmermann. They are the OE supplier of rotors for BMW, and the reason why we love this one is because they come coated from the factory with zinc. What's the benefit behind it? Well, here's Aiden again.
But the Zimmermanns are actually just coated from the factory, which is fantastic. Once they start wearing down, obviously the wear on the rotor is gonna rust, but the hubs, as well as the cooling vanes on the inside, they are not gonna rust, which is fantastic feature for the Zimmermann rotors. Don't skimp out and buy the all metal ones, like the all steel ones that aren't coated, because you're gonna pay for it later on, especially if you're parking your car outside in your driveway or out on the street. These are adequate to really shield you against rust. I mean, who likes rust on anything, right?
Next, we have the brake pads. The pads are from Techstar, and just like Zimmerman, they are the original equipment supplier of brake pads for BMW. So you can do yourself a favor and buy the exact same pads as the genuine BMW pads, but at a much lower price. We also have some set screws that hold the rotors in place, and you'll need a 6mm hex bit socket to screw these in if you ever need to. Alright, let's get into some of the tools we need. Mind you, we did not use every tool you see on display here for the job, but it is always a good idea to have extra tools laying around just in case. For each step along the way, we'll let you know which tools were used, but from a comprehensive list standpoint, here's a list of tools we had in preparation for today. Before we dive in, let's compare how much it costs to do this yourself versus the dealer. You saw earlier that the kit supplied by the OE supplier costs around $466. I called up a local dealer and asked how much they charge for a full brake job. I censored out the names to respect the dealer's privacy, but as you can see, the front and rear combined came out to $1,765 plus tax. With NJ tax added in, the total comes out to $1,882. So the question is, how much can you save by doing this yourself? Let's crunch some numbers here. Here we have all the parts and items that need to be replenished with each brake job. Even though things like anti-seize and thread locker will last you a long time, for the sake of simplicity, we're going to assume you'll need to buy them every time. And all of these parts combined comes out to about $550. And with the dealer quote at almost $1,900, the difference, which would then be the cost of labor, is around $1,300. That's quite the difference, but it is a bit premature to think that you'll save $1,300 with each brake job. We need to account for tools required to complete the job, and those quote-unquote one-time purchases are listed under column D. Add them all up, you get $1,030 to gather all the items necessary to start things off. Keep in mind though guys, these are just estimates, and depending on which brand you choose to go with for these tools, your startup cost may vary. So what does this all mean? It means the cost of your first job will be around $1,600. You're still saving about $260 by doing it yourself, but many will choose to have a dealer do it over this marginal savings. But starting with the second job, with all of the one-time purchases out of the way, you'll be saving in excess of $1,300. I'd say that's quite the return on investment, especially if you own multiple cars. So with that out of the way, let's get these brakes done. We'll be working on the front brakes first. The front jacking point is about 3 feet in from the front of the car. There is a tiny hole as you can see here, and you want to make sure your floor jack's contact point is aligned right at the center of that entrance. And guys, before you do this, make sure your car is in gear and the e-brake is engaged for extra safety measure. Once your car is lifted high enough, you can place the jack stands under the jacking points on both sides of the car. Make sure you place them at the jacking points. Otherwise, it's not going to hold and your car will collapse. To take the wheels off, you'll need an impact gun and a 17mm impact socket. If you don't have an impact gun, you can technically do this with a breaker bar and some brute force, but I highly recommend investing in one. It's a life changer. Before you take the final lug nut off, make sure to screw in a few wheel holders so that it doesn't free fall onto the rotor and the caliper. Next, we're going to take off the caliper and the rotor. Before doing so, it's a good idea to spray some penetrant onto the screws to add some lubrication to facilitate the process. As you can see, these rotors aren't in too bad of a shape. There's not a lot of lip that you can notice. If they were really worn out, you'll see a much more prominent sort of indentation between the outer ring and the disc. You don't see a lot of that here. And the disc itself is not too bad either. A really worn out rotor will have a lot of these sort of dimples that can be caused by various debris that come in contact with it, but these aren't too bad. Nonetheless, we're going to swap these out to be on the safer side and be proactive. What we're going to do here is take off the screw using a 6mm hex bit, and you'll need some sort of a long piece, something like a screwdriver that can stop the rotors from rotating to get this unscrewed. Once it's loose, don't remove the screw entirely just yet. Instead, move on to remove the caliper bolts. You'll need a T40 Torx bit for this one. These may be really stuck and you'll be tempted to use an impact gun, but try to be patient. You don't want to overdo it and end up cross-threading the caliper. The calipers are made of aluminum and it's really easy to cross-thread aluminum. So apply some more penetrant oil if needed, but stick with a simple ratchet and patience to get this bolt off. Once these two T40 bolts are out, we can go ahead and remove the caliper. Now, here's an important PSA. A lot of DIY videos of brake job for the 135i will tell you these two bolts that require 10mm hex bit need to be unscrewed to remove the caliper. So we unscrewed these. But we found out later that these two bolts don't need to come off for the caliper to be released, and it is actually recommended that these be left alone because BMW does not have part number for these bolts. Meaning, you can't buy them separately if you were to ever break these. To properly remove the caliper, there are two 16mm caliper mounting bolts behind the caliper that can be removed. Here's where they are and how they look like. The caliper may be stuck hard to the rotor, and you'll need to do some wiggling or possibly use a much greater force like you see Aiden do here to get it separated. The caliper is quite heavy and you don't want to have it hanging. It's too heavy to be supported solely by the brake line. So make sure to have something that it can sit on. Once the caliper is situated, go ahead and remove the 6mm screw to remove the rotor, and with the rotor off, it's time to go back to the caliper and take off the two T40s from its backside. And with all four T40s unscrewed, you can go ahead and remove the brake pads. The T40s are what hold the brake pads in place and allow them to move back and forth.
You see here, that's where it screws onto the caliper itself, but this area right here is what allows it to go back and forth on the pad itself, right? There's little grooves here. So if it was like this is what it's doing, is going back and forth. Okay, weird, but that's what it's doing. It's to ensure that your pads are aligned and 6 pistons, 3 on each side are pushing, and it's equal amount of force and it's sliding together.
Okay, at this point, you should have the rotor, the caliper, and the brake pads all removed and you're ready to install the new pieces. But before you do that, it's a good idea to clean the debris and rust with wire brush and some brake cleaner. And while cleaning, make sure to do this.
And this is a good time to kind of check your wheel bearings, right? Because if you did this and you heard noise, or if it didn't want to kind of spin, you're in trouble. That's basically telling you that you need to change the wheel bearing itself.
Once they're clean, apply some copper anti-seize to prevent seizing of the rotors.
You don't want to go nuts, but you want to just do a thin layer, right? And I'm going to wipe some of the excess off, but this is why your brake rotors just get stuck on here, onto your hub. And I'm so happy that I inspected the wheel bearing as well, because I thought, do I have to do this twice, basically taking off the rotor and all this other jazz? But it looks like it's in pretty good condition. I'm gonna put some in here as well. Okay, make sure that it's absolutely seated on your the hub. So you can see this outside ring here, that's where your wheel actually goes onto, and then there's another lip where your rotor actually goes onto. So try to line it up as best as possible, because you don't want to do this twice. And that looks pretty good to me. And like I said, these little guys do not need a ton of torque, okay? So I'm gonna, even though I'm using this, that's all it should take. And I'm gonna just check with a ratchet here. Like if it doesn't want to go anymore, that's it. That's it. You just want to apply just enough torque to set it on there, because when you have your wheel on there, this isn't going to go anywhere. Okay, this is just to help it from not shifting back and forth. You saw how I was kind of fumbling around with it, but that's really all it's for. And
before we place the new pads into the caliper, pop the hood open and open up the brake reservoir.
okay, and if you're wondering where the brake reservoir is, it's actually behind here, and pretty simple. There we go. You just kind of want to leave it cracked like this. All you're letting it is, because you have your caliper off and we're going to be pressing in the pistons, all we want to do is give it enough room. Because it's a hydraulic system, this allows it to for you to push the pistons back with relatively ease, versus if it was on here, I mean, you don't really have anywhere the fluid can travel up and down. So just leave this cracked a little bit, and we don't want anything to fly in. Just have it on there lightly.
So with the reservoir open, you can go ahead and push the pistons back into their rightful place, and take this opportunity to spray some brake cleaner on the caliper to get all the grease and gunk off.
What we want to do, so we talked about the little pins that go in here, and I cleaned it off with some brake cleaner and a little bit of paper towel. Doesn't have to be crazy, but what we want to do is just add a little bit of anti-seize here, and I'm going to put a little bit of anti-seize right here as well, just because it is going to touch the caliper on the side, and for whatever reason I don't want this to make noise, and you don't have to go crazy. This stuff is awesome. I love anti-seize because even if you're putting if you're using polyurethane bushings, they come in super handy. Okay, and you can see that it's completely flat here. That's what you want, guys, okay? Because it's a multi-piston caliper, that's what you want. And now I'm gonna try to screw in these guys again, so that they're completely in there.
Alright, both are screwed in, so we'll now work on the outer pad. For this one, don't screw the bolts in just yet. Just put some anti-seize on the contact points and place them inside the rotor and let them just comfortably sit there. I'll let you know when to screw the bolts back in. Before putting the caliper back on, take this time to clean the new rotor with some brake clean. Okay, now we're putting the caliper back on, and as mentioned earlier, we removed these two 10mm to remove the caliper. Again guys, we don't recommend doing this. Instead, remove the E16 caliper mounting bolts on the back side of the caliper to both remove and replace. Now's the time to insert the T40s for the outer pad that is sitting inside the caliper.
And we're not putting it on the threads, because the threads, like I mentioned, you want that to be tight. Okay, like so. When there's resistance, don't go any further with a power tool. Okay, that's on there. And I'm gonna do it again by hand one more time. Okay, that's on there, guys. Here, the final step, you do not want to skimp out on this. You definitely want to put anti-seize right here, okay? And the hub, because I drive this car all year round, and you do not want your wheels to be stuck. In case you get like a flat or you're putting winners on, you just want it to come off easily. Okay, and this is like the contact points here. And what I'm gonna do on this side is look at the back of the wheel. And if you see here, yeah, you definitely see some rust, right? The wheel itself is not rusting, it's the brake rotors. So that's gonna make it, so I'm gonna do it on the contact point. You don't need to do it on here, that's the sunken in part.
Okay guys, we're almost there. We're gonna go ahead and mount the wheel, and if you're using an impact gun to torque down the bolts, start with the lowest setting so that you don't over torque them. And remember to go in cross pattern. Well guys, that's it for the front, so let's go ahead and move on to the rear. As with the front, jack up the rear using the jacking points you see in the video and place the jack stands at their appropriate spots. We're going to skip the step of taking off the wheel and go straight to removing the caliper. Now, unlike the front caliper where we had two 10mm caliper bolts, which shouldn't be removed by the way, the rear caliper does not have them. So fortunately, the only way to take it off is by removing the caliper mounting bolts behind it, which is the correct way to do so. And to do this, you'll need an E16mm socket. These are really stuck on there. The torque spec for this is 81 foot-pounds, so you're really going to have to put a lot of force onto it. Aiden spent a lot of time and patience to unscrew these bolts, so take your time and be patient when you're on this step. And guys, I apologize for not being able to get a better view of this, but again, what you're looking for is a bolt that looks like this on these two mounting points to remove the caliper. Once the bolts are removed, remove the caliper and the rotor. While the whole process of removing the rotor and the pads is pretty similar to the front, there are subtle differences, and I'll let Aiden walk you through it.
The emergency brake is actually sitting behind the rotor here. So make sure you lower your e-brake when you're doing this, or else, because it's an expanding system, if you don't have the e-brake off, it's just basically gonna hold on to that rotor. You'll never be able to get it off. So don't make that mistake. You just wanna change your brake pads. It's very easy to do. Make sure you have the right size punch. Okay. Okay, easy. And then just kind of wiggle out the sliding pin. Okay, now I'm gonna push back the calipers a little bit. Okay. Okay, oh, there goes the, and these are Techstars as well, guys. And we're gonna take off the retaining clip, and then we're gonna put the e-brake down. We're gonna bust this out. Okay. And I can't tell you how much I love this tool, the electric ratchet. But you can use it like a ratchet, right? And then just blast it off. Fantastic. Okay, now in order to get this guy off, you're definitely gonna need some force. I'm gonna lower the e-brake. gonna lower the e-brake. Let's see if it actually wiggles out with the small hammer. I don't think so. Maybe we will. There we go. That is not what you want to see, guys. Look at this raised lip here and all the rust. I mean, this is probably the original rotor, it looks like. And look at the cooling veins. I mean, they are rust city. As much as this is cosmetically unpleasant to look at, I would say, you know, they need to be replaced. There's no way that you can like save this. The lip is just a little too aggressive for my liking. And like we mentioned, the whole series is about making this car faster than the stock 300 horsepower and the 300 foot-pounds of torque. We are looking at probably close to 400 wheel horsepower and more than 400 foot-pounds of torque with the full bolt-on modifications. And if your braking system just can't keep up with that power, you know, if you have old brakes like this, the front ones were okay. The rotors were fine, but the pads were kind of, you know, they probably had about 30% left. Why not just kind of replace everything and have that peace of mind? Because if you're driving and you can't stop, then, you know, that's really just half the battle, right? So
go ahead and put the new rotor on and screw in the retainer screw. Just like the front, you don't need to put a ton of pressure when screwing this back in. You need it just tight enough to keep the rotor from wobbling. That's it. We're gonna go ahead and put the caliper back on after doing some house cleaning on it. And unlike the front, you don't have to insert the pads into the caliper prior to mounting the caliper. The pads can be inserted afterwards.
And make sure you push in your piston, and you can do this by hand on the rear side because it's a 2-piston system. There we go. Now it's completely flush. So when I put this on, I can just slide the brake pad on, and that's the best thing about this system is that, you know, you really don't have to position the pad in there, and you can get it in like so. Now I'm going to use my 16 and my Milwaukee electric ratchet. It's on. This is like the best tool. Okay, and this is all it's going to do is about 35 foot-pounds of torque. That's not enough. So I'm actually gonna use this guy and then torque it down with a torque wrench. These are the kind of the brake pad pin. This is not a sliding pin because it's kind of stationary, but the pads actually go back and forth on this. So you want it to be clean. Okay. And if you always get some brake clean when you're doing a brake job, just so that, you know, you're fully prepared to take off any of this gunk or whatever it is, right? It's just a smart method to do so. Yeah. And great thing about these guys is they slide right in, right? And that's how it's gonna go. Basically, you see that this shape right here, this is what gives the brake pads the even kind of pressure. And you're gonna slide this guy in, under. And you can kind of start off with one and then do the other. Okay, then you kind of position this guy so. Okay, so if you look right here, you see the pins are now peeking through. So what we need to do is take a hammer. Mallet's not really gonna work. You can use a punch on the back end, but I'm gonna be really careful and kind of tap from the back here. Okay. That is on there. You're gonna see a little bit of movement because we pressed the pistons in, but it's ready to go now. What we need to do is put the wheels back on.
Okay guys, all that's left is putting the wheel back on. Clean up any rust or grime at the back of the wheel, put anti-seize on the contact points, and mount it back on, torquing the nuts in star pattern. Once the car is lowered, there are a few final things we need to make sure to do. First, close the brake reservoir. Second, torque the wheels to 82 foot-pounds both front and the rear. Third, though we didn't get to film it, pump the brake pedal a few times to transfer the brake fluid to the newly placed systems. And then finally, take the car out for a drive and bed the brakes in. Well, that's it guys. Hope you found this helpful, and if you did, give us a thumbs up and let us know in the comments. We have a lot more of these DIY videos lined up that you'll find helpful. Thanks guys, and we'll catch you on the next one.